Earl Dawson lived alone in a small wooden cabin high in the Colorado mountains. He had lived there for almost 20 years, ever since his wife passed away. The cabin was simple, but cozy. A stone fireplace warmed the room, and shelves of old books lined the walls. Outside, tall pine trees swayed with the wind, and the mountains stretched endlessly in every direction. His only companion was a small brown dog named Rusty. Rusty followed Earl everywhere and was always happy to curl up by the fire at night. Earl liked the quiet. He liked waking up to the sound of birds and the smell of pine. His neighbors were far away, and he rarely visited the small town below. Life was simple, and he enjoyed it that way. But one night, everything changed. A storm rolled in from the west. The sky turned dark, and heavy rain fell. Wind howled through the trees, shaking the cabin. Earl sat by the fireplace, sipping his tea, listening to Rusty growl at the windows. He had heard storms before, but this one felt strange. The rain hit the roof like a drum, and a flash of lightning lit the dark sky dot. Then he heard it. A loud crash in the woods behind his cabin. Earl set down his tea and stood, listening carefully. The crash sounded close. Rusty barked loudly, running to the door. Earl frowned. It was too late for hikers or animals. The storm was too strong. Something else had fallen. Earl grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the storm. The wind hit him like a wall, and the rain soaked his coat immediately. He called out, "Hello? Is anyone out here?" For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, he saw it, a small figure lying near a fallen tree. At first, he thought it was a person, but as he got closer, he realized it was not quite human. The figure was small, maybe the size of a teenage girl, but her skin glowed faintly under the rain. Her hair shimmered silver, and her eyes were bright, almost glowing in the dark. Earl froze for a moment. He had no idea what he was looking at. The figure stirred, lifting a hand weakly. She seemed hurt. Earl's first thought was that she needed help. He stepped forward slowly. "Are you okay? Can you walk?" he asked. The girl opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She held a small device in her hand, and it made a soft hum. Then a voice spoke in English, though it was faint and broken. "Please, help." Earl's heart skipped a beat. The voice was strange, almost musical, but it was understandable. "All right," he said. "I'll help. Come on, let's get you inside." He lifted her carefully. She was surprisingly light, almost weightless, and clung to him weakly. Rusty barked and jumped up, sniffing her carefully. Earl held her close, feeling how small and fragile she was. Back in the cabin, Earl laid her on a soft blanket near the fireplace. He sat beside her, rubbing her arms to warm her. Rusty stayed close, sniffing and watching. The girl looked around, eyes wide with wonder. "What's your name?" Earl asked. "Lyra," she whispered. "Lyra," Earl repeated. "All right, Lyra, you're safe here." She nodded faintly, but her eyes seemed confused. Earl could see that she was tired and frightened. He went to the kitchen and brought warm water and some bread. He tried to make her comfortable, talking softly as he prepared the small meal. Lyra watched him, tilting her head curiously. Her eyes reflected the firelight, glowing softly. She reached out a small hand, brushing the bread hesitantly. Earl smiled. "You must be hungry. Eat slowly." As she ate, Earl noticed the small device she held. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. He picked it up carefully, examining it. The device had lights and symbols, some of which moved and changed color. It seemed to respond to Lyra's touch. "What is this?" Earl asked. Lyra's voice trembled. "Ship. Broken need. Fix." Earl frowned. "Ship, you mean a spaceship?" Lyra nodded. Her small shoulders shivered, either from the cold or fear. Earl had never seen anything like this in his life. But he had an idea. He had been a handyman for most of his life. He might not understand spaceships, but he could help her stay safe until she healed. He wrapped her in a warm blanket and sat with her by the fire. "Don't worry, Lyra. I'll take care of you until your ship is ready." Lyra looked at him with gratitude. She reached out and touched his hand lightly. Earl felt a strange warmth, a connection he couldn't explain. He shook his head. "It's all right. Just rest now." Over the next few hours, the storm raged on outside, but inside, the cabin was warm and safe. Earl told her simple stories about the mountains and the town below. Lyra listened, sometimes asking questions through her small device. She seemed curious about everything, from the way the fire burned to the way Rusty wagged his tail. By the time the storm ended, she had fallen asleep. Earl watched her for a long time, wondering what kind of life she had led before arriving at his cabin. He knew one thing for sure. He could not let her leave alone in the storm. The next morning, the sky was clear, but the air was cold and sharp. Lyra had woken up, and she seemed stronger, though still weak. She tried to speak more clearly, using the device to translate her words. "Thank you," she said softly. "You, kind." Earl nodded. "It's nothing, Lyra. Everyone deserves help when they need it. You're safe now." She smiled faintly, a small, glowing curve of her lips. Earl felt a strange joy. He had never seen anyone like her, and he didn't know where she had come from. But he wanted to help her. Over the next few days, Earl fed her and helped her wash her small wounds. She was amazed by everything in the cabin, asking about simple things like the fireplace, the books, and the tools in his workshop. She tried to mimic his actions, carefully learning to use human tools. One day, Earl took out an old radio. "We might be able to call someone to help you," he said. Lyra looked at it nervously. She shook her head. "No. Others find me. Dangerous," she whispered. Earl frowned. "Dangerous? Why?" Lyra didn't answer clearly. She just shook her head and hugged herself. Earl understood that her world was very different from his own. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. For now, keeping her safe was enough. As the days passed, Earl and Lyra formed a quiet bond. She watched him as he repaired old tools or fixed the roof. He watched her as she learned simple human routines. Sometimes she would smile, a soft, glowing light in her eyes. Sometimes she would sit silently, staring into the fire, lost in thought. Earl began to notice something strange. Lyra would sometimes move close to him, resting her hand on his arm or shoulder. At first, he thought it was for warmth, but there was something else, something almost instinctive in her touch. He felt a strange calm and protection in her presence, even though she was small and delicate. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Lyra stood near the window, looking out. Earl sat beside her, drinking tea. "Your world, Earth, peaceful," she said softly. Earl nodded. "It can be, if people take care of it. But life is never simple." She looked at him with wide eyes. "You help me like no one else." Earl smiled. "I help because it's right. Because someone needed help. That's all there is to it." She stayed quiet, as if trying to understand. Earl didn't know what she was thinking. He only knew one thing. He had taken responsibility for her life, and he would not let anything harm her. That night, Lyra slept by the fire, wrapped in blankets. Rusty curled at her feet. Earl sat in his chair, staring at the flames. He wondered where she had come from, what kind of world she belonged to, and what would happen when she was ready to leave. Outside, the forest was calm, and the mountains were still. But Earl felt, deep in his heart, that their lives had changed forever. A small visitor from the stars had arrived, and she had brought something more than her strange, glowing eyes. She had brought connection, trust, and the beginning of a story that would reach far beyond the mountains. Earl didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. As long as Lyra was here, he would do everything he could to protect her. And she, in her own quiet way, had begun to teach him that even in the universe, kindness could be the strongest force of all. The storm was gone, but the real journey was just beginning. After the storm, the sun rose slowly over the mountains, casting golden light on Earl's cabin. Birds chirped in the trees, and Rusty barked happily as he ran through the wet grass. Inside, Lyra stirred from her sleep. She sat up on the blanket near the fire, blinking her glowing silver eyes at the sunlight streaming through the window. Earl was already up, chopping wood for the fireplace and humming a soft tune. "Good morning," he said, setting a cup of tea on the small table. "Did you sleep well?" Lyra looked at the tea curiously. Warm good, she said. She took a careful sip, and her eyes brightened. Thank you. You're welcome, Earl said with a smile. He watched her eat the simple breakfast of toast and honey he had prepared. You're getting stronger every day. That storm nearly froze you to the bone. You're lucky I found you. Lyra nodded. She stayed quiet for a while, watching the fire. Earl noticed how she sometimes reached out to touch the warmth of the flames, as if she were trying to understand the fire's heat. It was strange to see a creature that looked mostly human act with such wonder at ordinary things. Once breakfast was done, Earl decided to show her around the cabin. Come on, he said. I'll show you where everything is. You need to know in case you stay here longer. Lyra followed him closely, her steps careful but curious. She ran her hands along the wooden walls and touched the shelves of books with wonder. Humans many. Knowledge, she said softly. Earl chuckled. Books are full of knowledge, but you can't learn everything from them. Some things you learn by doing. He led her to the small workshop at the back of the cabin. Tools hung neatly on the wall. Hammers, saws, and screwdrivers were lined up in order. Earl picked up a small wrench and handed it to her. Here, you might need this someday, he said. Lyra examined the wrench with her glowing eyes. She mimicked his motions, turning it slowly, trying to understand. Tools, simple. Helpful, she said. Exactly, Earl said. Simple tools can do amazing things if you know how to use them. For the next few days, Lyra's recovery continued. Earl gave her warm baths, fed her regular meals, and helped her tend to small cuts and bruises. She quickly learned how to handle simple tasks, sweeping the floor, gathering firewood, even feeding Rusty. Earl was patient, and he spoke slowly so she could understand. At first, Lyra was shy. She stayed near Earl most of the time, watching him quietly. But little by little, she began to explore the cabin on her own. She peered out the windows, curious about the forest and mountains surrounding the cabin. She was fascinated by the way the wind moved the trees, the way the sun reflected on the snow, and the small animals that scurried across the forest floor. Earl noticed something unusual. Sometimes, Lyra would move closer to him, placing her hand on his arm or shoulder. He thought she was cold or needed comfort, but there was something different about it, something instinctive. She would look at him with her glowing eyes and smile faintly, as if she were learning trust in a way humans did not understand. One morning, Earl took a walk with Lyra through the woods. Rusty ran ahead, sniffing everything. The air was fresh, and the ground was soft from the recent rain. Lyra stayed close to Earl, her small hand brushing against his arm occasionally. Your world. Beautiful, she said, looking around. Many trees. Life, Earl smiled. It is. But life can be hard too. You have to protect it if you want it to last. Lyra nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. Protect. Like you? Protect me? Earl froze for a moment. He realized that she saw his care for her as protection, and perhaps more than that. But he didn't want to frighten her. Yes, he said gently. I want to make sure you're safe until you can leave. She smiled, a soft glow on her face. For a moment, Earl felt something he couldn't explain, a deep connection, almost like a bond forming without words. He shook his head and focused on the trail ahead, trying to ignore the strange feeling. Back at the cabin, Lyra began to explore other aspects of human life. She watched Earl cook meals, fascinated by the way ingredients changed when heated or mixed. She tried cooking herself, making small mistakes but learning quickly. She also began to notice Rusty's behavior, laughing softly when the dog chased his tail or rolled in the grass. Earl found himself enjoying her curiosity. She asked many questions, sometimes simple, sometimes profound. Why fire hot? Why plants grow? Why humans alone? He answered each one as best as he could, always patient, always kind. But Lyra's behavior began to change in subtle ways. She became more protective of Earl. If he bent down to pick up wood or check the fire, she would stand close, sometimes placing her hand on his back. If a loud noise startled her, she would grow tense, scanning the woods as if expecting danger. Earl noticed but assumed it was just fear. He didn't yet know the true reason her species' natural instincts during their bonding cycle were starting to influence her emotions. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Earl and Lyra sat by the fire. Earl was repairing a small piece of the cabin roof while Lyra watched him carefully. "You strong," she said softly. Earl looked up and smiled. "I've had a lot of practice. You get stronger too, every day." Lyra's silver eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm. Stay here," she whispered. Earl felt a warmth spread through him. It was not from the fire. He looked at her, trying to understand. "It's all right, Lyra. You can stay as long as you need." She smiled faintly and leaned back, still watching him. For Earl, those small gestures were new. He had spent his life alone, and now the strange visitor from another world was teaching him something he had almost forgotten. How connection could form unexpectedly, even across worlds. As days passed, Lyra continued to recover, and Earl continued to teach her. She learned to gather firewood, chop vegetables, and care for Rusty. She even helped repair small tools, surprising Earl with her quick understanding of human mechanics. But Earl also began to notice other changes. Lyra's eyes would glow brighter at certain times, and she sometimes appeared restless. She would pace the cabin slowly, muttering softly in her own language. Earl asked about it once. "Why restless?" he said gently. Lyra looked at him with wide eyes. "Changes. Body feelings. Strong," she whispered. Earl nodded slowly, though he did not fully understand. He assumed it was part of her recovery from the crash and the storm. He continued to care for her, offering warmth, food, and safety. One morning, while gathering herbs from the forest, Lyra suddenly froze. Her eyes glowed brightly, and she sniffed the air. Rusty growled softly. "What is it?" Earl asked, walking toward her. She looked at him, her voice trembling slightly. "Others searching." Earl frowned. "Others who?" Lyra shook her head. "From sky. My people must." Hide. Earl's heart raced. "Your people, you mean other aliens?" She nodded. Her silver eyes glowed faintly, and her small hands clenched together. "They find me dangerous. If no." Earl realized that her life was more complicated than he had imagined. Not only was she an alien, but she was being hunted by her own kind, and he had promised to protect her. That evening, as the fire crackled and the stars appeared in the clear mountain sky, Earl and Lyra sat quietly. She leaned against him, her small body radiating warmth. Earl felt the bond between them growing, though he did not yet understand its depth. He simply knew that he would not let anything harm her. Lyra, in her own way, began to understand humans better. She saw their kindness, their patience, and their willingness to care for others without expecting anything in return. It was different from her own species, where bonds were often forced by biology and ritual. Here, she felt something she could not explain: connection, safety, and trust. Earl watched her closely, noticing how she sometimes looked at him with a quiet intensity. He assumed it was curiosity or perhaps gratitude, but somewhere deep inside, he felt that their lives were becoming intertwined in ways he could not yet see. For now, the cabin was peaceful. The storm had passed, the forest was calm, and the bond between an old man and a young alien girl was quietly growing stronger. Earl did not know what the future held, but he knew one thing: Lyra needed him, and he would not let her face the world alone. And Lyra, for the first time since the crash, felt what it meant to trust someone completely. She was not alone anymore, and in this small cabin on a quiet mountain, she began to feel something that neither of them could have predicted: friendship, safety, and a connection that crossed worlds. The days passed slowly, filled with small routines, laughter, and learning. But deep in her mind, Lyra felt the first stirrings of something new, an instinct she could not yet control, one that would grow stronger with time. Earl did not notice it yet, but the future was already beginning to change. The days grew warmer in the mountains, but something about Lyra was changing. Earl noticed it first one morning when she stayed very close to him as he chopped firewood. Normally, she moved around the cabin freely, helping him, or exploring. But now she lingered near his side, her glowing eyes constantly watching him. You seem very close today, Earl said with a small smile. Are you tired? Lyra shook her head, though her hand brushed against his arm. No, just neared you. Earl paused. He felt a strange warmth in his chest at her words. He could not explain it, but something about the way she spoke, the way she looked at him, made him feel a quiet connection he had never felt before. He cleared his throat and returned to his work over the next few days. The change in Lyra became more noticeable. She became protective, almost instinctively. When Earl went to fetch water from the stream, she followed silently, keeping close. If Rusty ran ahead, she would call him back gently. If Earl bent down to tie a boot or pick up a tool, she would place her hand on his shoulder, almost as if she were keeping him steady. Earl did not understand it at first. He thought she was simply grateful or trying to repay him for saving her life. But there was something deeper in her actions, something that seemed instinctive and urgent. One evening, after they had gathered firewood and prepared dinner, Lyra sat by the fire and spoke quietly. Earl. Strange feeling, she said, her silver eyes glowing in the firelight. Body changes. Strong. Earl looked at her carefully. Changes? What do you mean? She hesitated. Something. In me makes. Care more. Must protect. You. Earl frowned. He did not fully understand her words, but the tone in her voice suggested urgency. Protect me? He asked. Lyra nodded. Yes, my kind. Bonding strong. Must near. Save. Earl realized she was trying to explain something very important, but her words were broken. Bonding? He asked. Like friendship? Lyra shook her head. No, more. Life and need. Keep always. Near. Strong. Earl felt a shiver run down his spine. He did not fully understand her species or their instincts, but he could see that she was experiencing something powerful and natural. He reached out and took her small hand gently. Lyra, whatever it is, I won't leave you alone, he said softly. I promise. We'll figure it out together. She looked at him, her glowing eyes reflecting trust and relief. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the crackle of the fire and the quiet night outside. The next morning, Earl woke to find Lyra already awake. She was sitting near the window, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Rusty lay at her feet, curled up and half asleep. You're up early, Earl said, stretching as he walked over. Lyra turned her head, and her eyes glowed faintly. Need to see. World, outside, Earl smiled. All right, let's take a short walk. They walked along the trail behind the cabin, moving slowly through the trees. Lyra seemed fascinated by everything, the way the wind moved the leaves, the birds in the trees, and the patterns of sunlight on the ground. But she also stayed unusually close to Earl, brushing against him if he slowed or paused. At the edge of a small clearing, Lyra stopped and crouched, her hands brushing the grass. She looked up at Earl with wide eyes. My sense is strong. Here, she whispered. Feel. Life near. Far others. Come. Earl frowned. Others, you mean your people? Lyra nodded. Yes. Searching. May find. Must hide. Must stay near. Safe. Earl felt a pang of concern. He had known that her kind might come looking for her, but hearing it made it real. He reached out and took her hand, holding it tightly. Don't worry, Lyra. We'll keep you safe. He said, no one will hurt you here. Lyra's eyes glowed brighter, and she pressed her hand to his arm. Earl felt a wave of warmth and a strange, calming energy flow through him. He shook his head, trying to understand. She was not just scared. Her instincts were strong, almost urgent. Back at the cabin, Lyra began to show more unusual behaviors. She would sometimes sniff the air, listening carefully. She would check the doors and windows, ensuring everything was secure. She watched Earl closely whenever he moved, her body tense but calm, ready to act. Earl realized that her species had instincts far beyond human understanding. She was protective because her biology demanded it, and she was bonding with him in a way he could not yet fully comprehend. One evening, after dinner, Lyra spoke again. Earl need Trust must keep. Near, always, Earl nodded slowly. I trust you, Lyra, and I know you trust me. That's all we need for now. She looked at him with gratitude, her silver eyes glowing faintly. For a moment, they sat quietly, both aware of the bond growing between them. Even if they did not fully understand it. As days passed, Lyra's instincts became stronger. She began to react to things that Earl could not notice. If a branch snapped in the forest, she would tense and scan the area. If a shadow moved outside the cabin, she would move closer to him, protective and alert. Earl noticed, but he did not try to stop her. He understood that this was part of who she was. And deep down, he felt honored that she chose to be near him, to trust him with her life. One night, as the stars appeared in the clear mountain sky, Lyra sat by the fire, her hands folded in her lap. Earl watched her quietly, thinking about how far she had come since the crash. You are human, very strong, she said softly. Help me, safe. Care like none other. All felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought much about how much impact kindness could have. Saving her life had created a connection he had never expected. You're welcome, Lyra, he said. I don't need a reason to help someone. But I'm glad you feel safe here. She smiled faintly. Safe, yes. Because you, here, always, near. Earl nodded slowly, realizing that their bond was growing strong every day. It was not just trust or friendship. It was something deeper, a connection that crossed the boundaries of species and worlds. The next morning, Earl decided to teach Lyra something new. He had found an old radio and a few simple electrical tools in his workshop. Let's see if we can fix this, he said. Handing her a small screwdriver, Lyra took it carefully, her glowing eyes full of curiosity. Learns human ways, she said. Earl smiled. Yes, you'll see. Simple tools can do amazing things if you know how to use them. They worked together for hours, testing wires and circuits, learning from mistakes, and laughing quietly when something didn't work. Earl was amazed at how quickly she understood human tools. Even though her body was different from his. By the time they finished, the radio crackled faintly, picking up distant signals from the town below. Lyra's eyes glowed with excitement. Work. Yes, humans. Clever, she said, smiling. Earl laughed softly. Not just humans. You're clever too. You learn fast. Lyra nodded, looking at him with a soft intensity. Earl felt that strange warmth again, the one that seemed to flow from her presence. He shook his head, trying to ignore it, but it was impossible. She was more than a visitor. She was becoming part of his life in ways he had never imagined. As night fell, they sat by the fire once more. Lyra leaned against Earl, her small body radiating warmth. Rusty lay at her feet, snoring softly. Earl watched the fire, thinking about the future. He did not know what challenges were coming. Her species might find her, or her instincts could create dangers he could not foresee. But for now, he had made a promise. He would keep her safe, no matter what. Lyra, in her own quiet way, had begun to understand humans. She saw their kindness, their patience, and their willingness to care for others without expecting anything in return. She felt a connection growing, a bond she could not control but could not resist. And in that small cabin on a quiet mountain, two very different lives were beginning to intertwine. Earl did not yet understand the depth of what was happening. Lyra did not yet fully understand her own instincts. But together, they were forming something new, a bond that crossed worlds, species, and the unknown. The mountains were calm, the forest quiet, and the night sky full of stars. But inside the cabin, life was changing. Earl and Lyra had found each other, and nothing would be the same again.